And as we begin our time of prayer and meditation this morning, we'll also light the first Advent candle. And the candle that we light this morning is the candle of faith. In the Christmas story, we see faith in action. Every character's part begins with them seeing, hearing, or otherwise discovering what is theirs to do. Then that discovery becomes a vision that is energized into manifestation. Motivated by faith, every person is called to step beyond normal behavior and do the seeming impossible. Young Mary experiences Spirit calling her to birth a new divine idea. She uses her faith to perceive the possibility and bravely allows the vision to grow within her until Jesus, a new idea of love and living, is manifest into the world. Joseph is called to have faith in Mary, in the angel, and to trust himself to protect and nurture Mary and the child. The story tells us that he steps outside the traditions of his culture. The shepherds have faith that they are called to witness something important. They trust that their flock will be safe through the night. They are drawn to be part of the shift in consciousness that is happening. The three wise men, coming from afar, walk in faith to view the child, following a star, a bright light that resonates with something deep within them. Faith energizes our vision into manifestation. And from Mark chapter 4, verse 40, he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And so as we continue with our time of prayer and reflection, I invite you to consider the light from the Advent candle that is symbolic of the light within you, and how through faith each one of us takes that spark of divinity that we are born with and nurtures that flame so we can bring that light to the world. We pray during this season of Advent that flame will rise in us and allow us to bring that light to the world. And that others will take heart and find their own light within. And so in this sacred season of Advent, we honor this journey that we are on, the rebirth of our Christ consciousness. And a conscious effort on our part to bring our light into the world. And so as we consider this sacred journey, this path that we are on to bring the light, we turn our thoughts inward to the glow that surrounds our heart space, to the warmth of divine love that is always available to us, to the presence of divine spirit, that light in us that we nurture and cultivate and allow to guide us on our journey. And so I invite you now to simply reflect and focus on that light within you. And consider what it means to bring our light to the world as we take a few moments now in silence. I invite you to bring your attention back to this time and place. And to bring with you that glow from the divine light that is in you, the warmth of that flame, the brightness of your spirit, and to know that your awareness of your divine nature is yours simply for the taking of a moment in quiet, turning your thoughts inward, recognizing Spirit, and inviting Spirit into your day. We affirm this through the name and through the power of the living, loving Christ consciousness. And we say, thank you, thank you, thank you, God. Amen. I told the folks in the first service that as long as Pete could write a song called A New Lord's Prayer, I had my own version that I had just made up right on the spot this morning. And it was, give us this day our daily Catherine and Joe and Pete, right? All right. Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome to the first Sunday of December and the first Sunday of Advent. You know, last year on the first Sunday of December, we had about 5 or 6 inches of snow on the ground. And we were at this point, there was a big pause between the next wave of snow that was coming later in the afternoon. So I looked at my phone this morning and saw that it's going to be 60 degrees tomorrow morning. And I was pretty excited about that. We'll get the snow for Christmas, I'm confident of that. So just be patient. Just be patient. You have a little handout in your bulletin today. It's the purple sheet. And on it, what I have put there for you are some of the metaphysical meanings of the elements of the Christmas story. And I'm going to talk about some of those today in my talk. And there are many, 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 many more interpretations, metaphysical interpretations of the Christmas story that we could never fit on a handout to give to you all. Is anybody missing that? Because, okay, if we could have somebody, one of the ushers, just grab a few of those and pass them out, that would be awesome. The information that I shared with you today, and me probably will go in and do a little bit more of that next Sunday, comes from a book that's called The Trip to Bethlehem. And this book was written by a Unity minister back in the 90s. She has a very unusual name, Hypatia Hasbrook. But it's the traditional Christmas story as a guide to spiritual transformation. And again, there's all sorts of metaphysical interpretation of the characters and the numbers and the events and all of those things there. Certainly we don't have time to, we need one more over here. We don't have time to metaphysically interpret the entire story. And if there are certain elements of the Christmas story that have always been special to you, and we don't cover it in one of the talks, just send me an email or call and leave a voicemail message if you'd like to know what the metaphysical interpretation is of lambs or whatever is your favorite part of the Christmas story, and I'll get that information to you. And I wanted to take a look at the metaphysical interpretation of the Christmas story because as we all know and as I've talked about with you numerous times before, the Gospels, Old Testament and the Gospels in the New Testament, so much in the Bible is stuff that we simply cannot verify. And I always have viewed the Bible as basically the story of the Jewish people and their relationship to God and their understanding of their relationship to God and how that relationship evolves over time. So first and foremost, it's a story with some historical accuracies in there, but certainly, I would never take it literally. And in Unity, we don't. So the Bible and the Gospels in particular are filled with a lot of stories that can't be verified, but a lot of it that occurs in the context of the stories can be verified. So that always makes it kind of interesting as to which parts are fact and which parts are fiction. But one of the cool things that I learned in ministerial school was that in the Roman records, and the Romans were notoriously awesome record keepers. They wrote down everything. And in the Roman records, there are, I believe, 3 separate references to a person named Jesus in the time and the place that we see him in the Gospels and in the New Testament. So we're pretty sure that a person by that name really did live at that time. Unfortunately, nothing else about the stories that we have in the Gospels can be verified factually, although there are people, places, and events that can be proved out through other sources of information. But there's a lot of contradictions, even from one gospel to the next, in terms of how the stories unfold. And beyond that, the stories were not written down for a couple of generations, until a couple of generations after Jesus died. They had been handed down through oral storytelling, which was the method at that time, because very few people could read and write, and those who could read and write almost always just simply used that for like legal things, like writing down contracts and agreements and that sort of thing. People, as a rule, did not read and write. Add to that the fact that they were copied by hand, I don't know how many thousands of times throughout the years, and translated from one language to another language and other languages along the way. So lots of opportunities for errors and confusion in how that story came to us. And yet, the stories have survived for 2,000 years. And the Christmas story in particular is one that is embraced not only by believers and followers in different denominations all around the world, seasonally and from time to time it is even embraced by those who are unchurched or unaffiliated, because it just feels good this time of year to think about the Christmas story and to perhaps think about what that might mean, to have this baby and wise men and shepherds and all of these things, all of those things that we love about the Christmas story. So in New Thought, generally speaking, and in unity in particular, we are what I like to call us Christmas Christians. Now there's Christmas Christians, and then there's Easter Christians, okay? We're Christmas Christians, and I'll tell you what that means in just a second. We have a couple of small tables in this big tent that's called Christianity, and way over, where our little tables are, that's where all the Christian Christmas people are, the Christmas Christians, and then the other ones are the Easter Christians. And they're the ones who believe that Jesus was the exception, that his sole purpose in living was to die a sacrificial death to pay the ransom for sins of humanity. And that's why we call them Easter Christians, because they're completely focused on his death and resurrection. That's the foundation of their beliefs. On the other hand, we as Christmas Christians celebrate the birth of Jesus, the example, our brother and our way shower, because his story is our story. We look at Jesus as being both fully human and fully divine. And we also believe that we are divine by nature, that we're born with that spark of divinity. Not that blot and stain of original sin, but that spark of divinity that each one of us has within us, which makes us just like Jesus. Fully human, fully divine. He was our brother and our way shower, and he was the example. We also embrace the Christmas story because of the divine ideas and the spiritual truth that it symbolizes for us. especially when we can look at it metaphysically. So first and foremost, the journey to Bethlehem is a symbolic representation of our journey towards a higher consciousness. And the Christmas story symbolizes that journey of spiritual transformation. The story of the wise men is also very, very rich with symbolism about that journey of spiritual transformation. And in order to really fully appreciate the story of the wise men, we have to kind of get ourselves a little bit reoriented to where, when, and how they actually show up in the story. Because we have some misperceptions about that. Now, if you go and Google nativity scene and just look at images, you're going to find lots and lots of nativity scene images that show the wise men and their camels right along with the shepherds and their lambs and the cows that were lowing, all of them gathered around in the manger. I know when I was a little kid, my grandmother took some ceramic classes, and she was very, very good. And in particular, she was very good at painting the ceramic pieces before they were fired. And she made a full nativity set for all three of her daughters. So each one of us had that nativity set that was made by my grandmother as part of our Christmas tradition. And I remember ours the boxes would come down from the attic very carefully. My dad would climb up into the attic and hand them down carefully to my mom. We'd take them to the kitchen table and unpack them and take out all of the figures that were lovingly wrapped in paper, dust them all off, get them cleaned up. And then we would put the manger, the wooden manger, and it was a good sized wooden manger that my grandfather had made. We'd slide that underneath the Christmas tree and begin to put in the cotton and some straw and put all the figures around, And I used to just lay underneath the Christmas tree and look at that manger scene and think about that story, and move the little lambs around, and move the camels around. I couldn't get into too much trouble because if we're on the floor sitting on the carpeting, I just had to be careful not to bang them into each other and neck them up. But we always had the camels and the wise men all right there as part of that manger scene. And the fact of the matter is that they weren't there. They hadn't gotten there yet. So they were never there on the night of Jesus' birth. The shepherds were there, but the wise men were still traveling. And the wise men had been traveling for a really long time. Speculation is that they came from Persia. And if you look at the distance that they needed to travel, they were actually on the road for the better part of a year. Now, we know that there's some unusual things about Mary's pregnancy, okay? But it was probably about 9 months. Nobody's disputing that. So what that means is that the wise men were on the road, traveling to see the new king because of some vision, dream, inspiration, some seeds that had been planted in them. They started that journey probably before the angel even appeared to Mary. And they actually arrived a few weeks after Jesus was born. So they weren't at the stable. And in fact, they were getting close, but weren't even really kind of in the vicinity just yet. They were following the star, and as you'll see in the little handout that I gave you, they were the only ones who could see the star. There's no recording of the shepherds seeing the star or anybody else. The shepherds saw a bright light, but the wise men were the only ones who saw the star, and they were following that star. And I don't know what it's really like to follow a star in the sky, but each of us has had an experience where we've seen some sort of bright light in the sky. And when you look at a bright light in the sky, it's kind of hard to gauge exactly how far away it is. Sometimes the planets are very visible to us in the night sky, and yet we know that they're not close. And so the star actually hovered over the place where Jesus was, which was in Bethlehem, which was about 15 miles south of Jerusalem. So they've been traveling for the better part of a year. They're looking for the new king. The star seems to have kind of parked itself, and guess what? They're approaching Jerusalem. Well, of course, this is where the King of the Jews would be. This is the central city. This is the center of commerce. This is the capital. This is where the temple is located, of course. This is where the new King of the Jews would be found. So they didn't go to Bethlehem first. They went to Jerusalem first. And they got to town and they started asking around, where's the new king? We've come to see the baby. Folks are like, I don't know. What you talking about? But word of their inquiries got to the temple priests and the temple folks pretty quickly. More importantly, they got to Herod pretty quickly. And of course he's like, excuse me, new king? I don't think so. We already have a king. I'm the king. And so there's an exchange between the wise men and Herod makes a deal with him. Well, okay, I've talked to the high priests, and their response is that this new leader will come from the town of Bethlehem. And so you go and check it out, and then come back to me and tell me what it's all about. And so they leave Jerusalem, and then they finally go to Bethlehem. Now, this is a couple weeks after Jesus has been born, and by now the family is they're no longer in the stable. They're no longer, with the baby in the manger. They're living in a house. And so when you go back and you read the story, what you'll see is that the wise men showed up at the house and paid their homage to the baby in that location. And there's some really interesting things about the fact that they stopped first in Jerusalem and then ended up in Bethlehem. Because metaphysically, Bethlehem is the home base, if you will, for the tribe of Benjamin. Now you remember there were 12 tribes of Israel, and then they were all scattered to different parts of the Middle Eastern area. And the tribe of Benjamin became affiliated with the town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is also known as the city of David. And David, if you remember the story of David and Goliath, David is the young shepherd boy who slew Goliath, saved the people, and came to everyone's attention, and then ultimately became their king. Perhaps one of the most beloved kings to ever reign over Israel. Reigned for 50 years almost. 47 technically, but almost 50 years. And was a very beloved king during that time period. That period is referred to as the Golden Age of Israel. And so the town of Bethlehem has all of this stuff kind of going for it. And metaphysically, the tribe of Benjamin symbolizes good fortune that comes through faith in God. Not by virtue of our own industrious efforts and hard work and smarts, but good fortune that comes by virtue of faith in God. And of course, you remember the relationship between the Jewish people and God was a series of promises made, promises broken. And those who actually kept faith in God, those who actually stayed with Moses as they left Egypt and were seeking the promised land, were ultimately rewarded with good fortune for their faith in God. David metaphysically represents divine love. And divine love, while not fully developed in human beings, is still individualized in human consciousness. And so this beloved ruler who ruled for a period of 50 years is that embodiment of goodness in action, of goodness and what it means to lead and live from that place. And here's an interesting piece. You talk about the fact that Jerusalem kind of sits up on a plain, or is built on a ridge, if you will. And so it is the highest place in the land, with the exception of Bethlehem. Because Bethlehem, which is about 15 miles to the south, sits a couple of feet higher than Jerusalem. But it's not such a big place, it's not such a busy place, so people don't pay much attention to that. People talk about going up to Jerusalem, but they don't really talk about going up to Bethlehem. But if you do, leave Jerusalem, head south to Bethlehem, you're going to rise up just a little bit, and there's a difference in elevation. And symbolically what that means is that we have to leave the peace of mind that comes to us from that high place that Jerusalem is. Leave that peace of mind to seek an even higher consciousness. That higher consciousness where we connect with and embrace and embody our Christ consciousness. The place where we find that Christ consciousness within ourselves. So Bethlehem represents a state of consciousness that's dominated by faith and love. And it is only in this place, this state of consciousness, that the Christ child could be born. It's the only place, faith and love, where our Christ consciousness can be born and become the ruling factor in our lives. It is only in a state of Christ consciousness that ultimately our ego will give way to our higher self and to our divine nature, where the new king will replace the old king. Now, throughout our lives, we have all had these experiences where we catch a glimpse of our sacred self. We catch a glimpse of what it really means to be a spiritual being having this human experience. We catch a glimpse of this unlimited potential that we are. And we kind of live from one moment to the next on our spiritual journey. But we must stick with those moments of awareness, those moments of awakening. We've got to cling to those glimpses of our sacred self and go with them in the same way that the wise men followed the star. Because only we can see those glimpses of our sacred self. And it is only we who can follow that star and that light to Bethlehem. Those moments of awakening lead us to that place that is ruled by faith and love. And so the journey to Bethlehem does not end with the birth of the Christ child in the stable. Because Bethlehem symbolizes our awakening. And it is only when we are awake that our journey can truly begin. God bless you, and have an amazing week.